So this will start our unit on ancient Egypt. For this PowerPoint, you're going to need everything in yellow. So all the text in yellow is what you're going to need to put on your study guide, and that's what will be on your quiz and help you with other things throughout the unit. So we want to understand the first off to give a general idea of what the experience was like of being an ancient Egyptian before we start getting down to the real nitty-gritty of the stuff here. So just some big picture ideas to keep in the back of our minds as we're talking about the Egyptians is that the ordinary Egyptians lived in the most prosperous country in the ancient world. The Egyptians had such a easier time of grazing crops and just flat out surviving than a lot of the other ancient peoples. And so that's really going to color and kind of shape their worldview and their outlook on life. If we were offered by aliens to travel back in time and when we plop anywhere we want on the world in the ancient world years in the BC area, we would want to pick Egypt because again, for how prosperous, how easy life is for the Egyptians. As we'll talk a lot about today with Egyptian geography, Egyptians very much depend on the Nile River. If they were able to control the flooding, the river guaranteed a yearly harvest. And early on in ancient Egypt's civilization and in their history, they were able to figure out ways to not only predict the flooding, but also be able to control it through irrigation projects. And that really made life easy for the Egyptians. The ancient Egyptians were among the first people to identify themselves as a people. The idea that there's a shared culture and a shared experience all up and down the Nile River, rather than just being a blood relative as a part of your tribe or your family or other stuff that we have from there. Egypt was an intensely conservative and traditional society. There was not a whole lot of wide changing things that we see through all the different dynasties and periods of Egyptian history. Because life is so easy along the Nile, and because everybody really wants to keep what they have going, people are going to say, well, this is what my father did, and he did the same thing as my grandfather, who did the same thing as the great grandfather, and all those previous generations had everything go great for them. So then why change? What is going to be new? What's going to improve our situation when we look out beyond our borders, we see everybody struggling and digging in the dirt and causing all sorts of problems. So it's going to be very reluctant to change, and we're going to see that Egypt is not going to have a whole lot of fluctuations or revolutions throughout its time period. Piggybacking off that, because of how life easy is in Egypt, the Egyptians believed that foreigners had nothing to teach them. All these foreigners, they're doing all the other things, they're having such a hard time where the Egyptians are not. It's a lot easier, and so they're not going to be open to a lot of exchanging of ideas or things from there because the Egyptians so much believe in not only their superiority, but how well they're doing compared to everybody else. Finally, and we'll see this come up again and again throughout the unit, is the Egyptians believed in a concept called ma'at. And this can kind of be translated different ways: beauty, proportion, balance, order, eternal truth, repose. But basically, life is ordered. There is a balance, there is a rhythm to life. And if you can find that, if you can embrace that rhythm, embrace that way of thinking about the world, you're going to be able to find ways to improve yourself and also be able to be successful uh, in is what you're doing. So this is where we're going to spend the bulk of the time today on Egyptian geography. The Egyptian geography itself is heavily influenced by the Nile River. The Nile River is the longest river on Earth. It flows for over 4,100 miles long, north from East Africa all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. Your trivia fact about the Nile River is not only it's the longest river on Earth, it's one of the few major rivers that actually, if you're looking like it on a map, flows up the map. It's flowing the directions starting in the south and flowing north. Particularly if we're here in the United States, and our American worldview, we tend to think of rivers starting at the top of the United States, the north, and flowing down. The Nile River actually is a little bit different. It's flip-flop kind of from our point of view. The yearly flooding from the highlands of East and Central Africa in the mountains and the snows there as they melt help to bring water. And as that water is rushing down, it picks up soil and other stuff from the desert and brings that to places in the desert that be inhospitable to people from there. And so that's what allows the Egyptians in order to be able to be successful. This fertile soil was referred to the ancient Egyptians as the black land because it's literally what it is. It's a deep, dark, black, fertile soil being brought from the highlands of East Central Africa to the literal desert that is Egypt. And so again, if we go outside here in Illinois and we go and we dig in the dirt, we're going to have nice, thick, black prairie soil from there. And that's the same kind of idea, the same type of stuff that's going to be what the Egyptians are doing. On the flip side, the infertile, the desert sand is going to be referred to as the red land. And so those are two types of ideas from there. When we're thinking about looking at this on a map, you want to think that the black land, the very fertile soil, is only going to be how far the river is able to flood on either side of the banks of the Nile. So it's going to be a very thin little strip on either side of the Nile River itself, and most of Egypt is going to be that desert red land. The Egyptians worked through a set of complex irrigation works to be able to pump water out when they needed it and also be able to channel the flooding so it was even less destructive than what it could have been, and also be able to capture that water once it was out there to help water their crops throughout the growing season. The geography of of Egypt itself also with its deserts on either side, an eastern desert and a western desert of the Nile River Valley, acted as a barrier, a pretty formidable barrier for most of the history of the ancient Egyptians to keep the foreigners from coming in there. We saw how the lack of natural barriers in Mesopotamia led to invasions and conquests of one people over another people again and again and again and again throughout our last unit. Here we're going to basically see the Egyptians are able to, with their natural barriers, be able to keep them from there. And on top of that, it's also going to kind of hem the Egyptians in to where, again, their worldview is going to be very much what's surrounding it from there. With the Nile River, it's everybody very early on in Egypt recognizes that Egypt cannot exist without the Nile River. The famous Greek historian Herodotus, who writes in the 5th century BC that Egypt is the gift of the Nile, and that it can't be any more true there. Without the Nile River, there would be no Egypt today. There would be no ancient Egypt from there. So again, when we're talking about the Nile River, when we're talking about other major rivers throughout the globe, the Amazon and the Mississippi, the GIF does a nice job of kind of explaining not only how long it is, but also the direction that is. And then you can kind of see that the Nile River is a much more slower moving, meandering sort of river versus, say, the Mississippi, and even look how fast the Amazon zip it around. Again, the Nile River flows from the south, so it starts in our Tanzanias and then our Ethiopias, and then flows through Sudan up into Egypt itself from there. And that's as of right now here in 2020. There's a little bit of controversy because Ethiopia is building a big, huge, giant dam to provide hydroelectric power. It's actually what this from those articles are from, and the Egyptians are all worried about it because that's going to block up a whole lot of water for Ethiopia, which is good for them, but everybody else down it is not going to from there. We're talking about the red land and the black land. This is a great map that kind of shows that when you're doing your maps for homework. Hint at hint, wink, 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 nudge, nudge, nudge. This is what it kind of should look like. We have a thin kind of sliver of green that goes through the center of the desert, and that's our black land where the Nile River is overflowing on either side of its banks. As you can see, most of Egypt is desert, and so everyone is pretty much going to live along this long, thin corridor along Egypt itself. And the contrast between the black land and the red land is pretty dramatic. You can be in some spots where you can straddle. You can have your foot in desert sand, and you can have the other foot in grass and in crops. And I mean, you can hop them back and forth. Say, now I'm in the red land. Now I'm in the black land. Now I'm in the red land. It's that distinct of a line to be able to move back and forth from there, as this is kind of showing in different ways throughout there. Today, there's a lot of people that live along the Nile, and so it's kind of a real big deal to be with its water management and other things. And again, this allows for the ancient Egyptians to live along there as well. River travel along the Nile River allows people to reach the interior of Africa. What's nice about the Nile River itself is it's pretty easily navigable. The current goes from the southern part of Africa and flows north. So if you want to hop in your boat and just put it in the river in Ethiopia, it'll eventually spit you out in the Mediterranean Sea. Vice versa, the prevailing winds in Egypt blow from the north towards the south. So if you hop in your boat in the Mediterranean Sea, you unfurl your sails, the winds will actually push your boat down there. So it's pretty easy. You don't have to do a whole lot of human navigation or human effort to be able to move quickly from there. So again, you can sail down the river from interior of Africa out to the Mediterranean Sea, and then from the Mediterranean Sea, right, you can be sailed down that way. The only obstacle along the way are what are called cataracts, and these are river rapids. And in some of these places, it's a pretty dramatic drop off between the two areas. And so we'll see with these cataracts, uh, different towns and cities develop around them because it actually requires, in some cases, actually pick your boat and move it up and down around there, or take all the goods off, unload it, and then put it onto another spot from there. Egypt itself, for the ancient Egyptians, is divided into two kind of geographic areas. The first is called Upper Egypt. And remember, it's a lot easier if you see my hands in class, but this is an important thing here, particularly on your maps. The upper part of Egypt is from the first cataract to where the Nile River fans out, meaning it's in the south. The southern part of Egypt is higher up, so water flows from the high point to a low point. So that's what happens here. So Upper Egypt is literally higher than the other part of Egypt that we're going to study. And so that's going to be in the south, whereas Lower Egypt is going to be closer to the Mediterranean Sea. At sea level, it's going to be lower down. It's going to be the Nile River goes. And so this is in the Nile Delta region near the sea. So again, Upper Egypt is in southern Egypt from Wadi Haifa all the way up to Cairo, again, kind of where the Great Pyramids are. Whereas Lower Egypt is pretty much everything north of Cairo. It's the Delta region of Egypt. The Delta is a broad, large, triangular area of land formed by soil deposit at the river's mouth. You probably might be familiar with because you've seen like the History Channel and like the Swamp People and all the people in the bayou around from there. It's the same type of deal. When the rivers usually get close towards the sea, they kind of fan out. Right, they kind of have all these small little tributaries, and that allows, particularly in a desert area like Lower Egypt, to be able to have a lot more fertile land towards the Mediterranean Sea. Than as we saw from our maps, it's a lot thinner out from there. So again, key concept, or highlight this again in a couple of maps here before we leave. But again, Upper Egypt is in the south. It's literally higher. It's the taller part of Egypt. Lower Egypt is lower to the sea level because it's closer towards the Mediterranean Sea in the north. So make sure we can make that distinction. So again, to help you out, we're labeling our maps here from the first cataract near Aswan, where the Aswan High Dam is on Egypt today, all the way to Memphis or Cairo. That is all Upper Egypt. Again, it's literally higher up. Everything north of Cairo or Memphis on this map is Lower Egypt, and that's all the Nile Delta region from there. So that's an easy way to do it. And again, what we'll see is a lot of the ancient Egyptians will settle along the Nile River because that's really the only hospitable place they can go and find. As we said, some of these cataracts are pretty intense and require us not only navigation skills to move through them, but also require picking up your boats and moving around from there. That's all we got for today. Hopefully, you understand what this is going on to be able to help you with your maps for homework. If you have any questions, make sure you talk to Mr. Cranmer.